Okay, so the starting place for self-determination theory is with what we call an organismic meta-theory. There are two really important points to that. The first is we assume that people are by nature proactive organisms. It is in our nature to be acting on the environment in our attempts to master it and be effective in terms of dealing with the environment. I mean that in terms of the internal environment as well as the external environment. We are active by nature. And secondly, we believe that all human beings have an inherent growth tendency. That means it is in our nature to grow and develop. Development is not something that gets done to us. Development is something that we do. However, the proactivity and the integration, or the development is toward integration. For those to function effectively, those processes, we need certain kinds of nutriments. It's this last point that is important in the sense that it makes the theory dialectical. Nutriments, when they're present, facilitate effective functioning, and when they're not present, lead to ineffective functioning. Okay, so point number one in terms of the relation to positive psychology. Some theories are organismic theories that have the inherent notion of activity within them. Other theories in psychology are somewhat more mechanistic and view people as being passive. I think that the implicit view in many of the cognitive psychologies that are currently in vogue in psychology are by nature implicitly viewing the human being as passive, needing to be trained, programmed, whatever you like, by the environment, whereas others are, as I said, more organismic. My comment with respect to positive psychology is I don't hear meta-theory discussed much in positive psychology, and it seems to me that it would be important to really think about the starting place that we have when we're setting out to do positive psychology. Do we have an organismic, active organism meta-theory that really allows us to do the best and most positive theorizing we can do? And if we're caught in a kind of mechanistic or more passive organism view of human nature, does that really allow us to do what positive psychology wants to be doing? I simply raise that as a question. I don't have an answer to it. I hope some of you do. Now, the central aspects of self-determination theory. Self-determination theory is a motivational theory at heart, and one of the most important aspects to it is that we believe that there are different kinds of motivation. Motivation is not something that just differs in amount with more versus less motivation. It differs in kind. The distinction that we believe to be the most important is between autonomous motivation and controlled motivation. To be autonomous means that you fully endorse that which you're doing, and you do it with a feeling of volition, of willingness, of choice. Being controlled, in contrast, means to feel coerced and seduced into doing things. And as you do that, your experience is one of pressure, compulsion, obligation. So we make this distinction, and it's absolutely critical distinction within the theory that runs through it, and I'm going to be talking quite a bit about that today. Because autonomy is so important, it is also important to say what autonomy is not. And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about what autonomy is not from an SDT, or self-determination theory, perspective. I don't know what Webster's dictionary says about what autonomy is, but I do know what self-determination theory says what autonomy is, and therefore I can say what we think it is not. Autonomy does not mean independence. A lot of psychologists, when they use the term autonomy, are talking about independence, doing it yourself. That is not what we mean by autonomy. You can be dependent on other people in an autonomous way. You can also be independent in an autonomous way. My hope is that each one of us here in the room is autonomously dependent on some other people, like our closest friends, our romantic partners, our parents. Family and close friends are people we want to be dependent on, but we want to do it in a way that's really volitional, allows us to feel free in doing that. Okay, autonomy is not a stage of development. It is in Erikson's theory. It is not in ours. In self-determination theory, it runs across the lifespan, and it is not individualism. You can be autonomously individualistic, but you can just as easily, in fact, I would say you can be more easily autonomously collectivistic. There's nothing antagonistic about collectivism and autonomy. Okay, some additional key aspects of self-determination theory. SDT postulates that there are three basic psychological needs: the needs for competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Now, satisfaction of these three needs are the nutriments that are necessary for effective functioning, for being autonomous, for feeling happiness and eudaimonia, for being effective and evidencing well-being. To the extent that the needs are thwarted, what we consistently find is poorer functioning, less well-being, and so forth. Okay, so that's the important point with respect to the business of what the nutriments are. So, competence. It's a sense of effectiveness and competence in one's context, in whatever it is that one is doing at the time. That's straightforward. Autonomy, I've been talking about it. Behaving in accord with abiding, deep values and interests. And relatedness, of course, is about feeling cared for, about caring for others, about having a sense of belongingness and involvement in social contexts. And I want to say some things about the concept of needs and what we mean by it, because our definition of needs is somewhat different than the definition of many other psychologists. For us, basic needs are essential nutriments for growth, integrity, and wellness. Needs are evolved, they are not learned. That is to say, they come from evolution. We are talking about things that are inherent in the nature of being human. Inherent in the nature of being human is that we need to be competent, autonomous, and related in order to function well. Consequently, of course, because they're evolved, it means they are universal across cultures. They might operate differently in different cultures, but still they're essential regardless of culture in order for people in whichever culture it is to be psychologically healthy and to function effectively. And needs are not necessarily conscious desires. You might think you don't need relatedness and you can really go through life completely on your own. That might be your conscious desire, but what the research shows is that if you do, there will be negative psychological consequences associated with it. So this is what we define as in terms of basic psychological needs. Many of the needs that are studied in psychology, some in Maslow's theory, certainly very much in Henry Murray's theory, Dave McClelland, and so forth, view needs as learned individual differences where people differ in terms of their need strength. That is not the way we define it. They are not learned, they're evolved and natural.